It will be very uninteresting and also very dry to you, but it's just as I feel now. I will endeavor to do better next time, so you will please excuse this one. Please write soon, tell me all the news. Let me know when you're to be married. Who's your beau, and is he good looking, and anything else you may think up to fill off a good long letter. I remain your cousin. But no, that wasn't the one. He tells about, oh, the quarters have plenty of, let's see, business is very good. The poor people who were burned out of house and home are now in very comfortable quarters and have plenty of clothing and food for the present. The stories about the money and clothing sent here from other cities and the country being appropriated for other purposes than what they were intended are not true, for the committees are very careful and say they will show where all the monies and clothing has been distributed. They probably have been imposed upon in a few instances. There are long rows of buildings, frame, but divided off into rooms for families, and today many of these families fare better than they did previous to the fire. People are rebuilding all over the burnt district, but the buildings are mostly wooden shanties. There are some very large brick blocks going up already. They are building a temporary frame for the courthouse this winter. We will soon be in it. A substantial building is to be erected in the spring on old ground for a courthouse. We've not had a fire for 2 weeks. The weather is pleasant, which is a blessing to the people here. I can't find that. Where he tells about and it's so true today. Yeah, what he says is, when he was talking about, and I can't find it where it is, he didn't keep a very straight line in his letter writing either. But he says that they'd had all this stuff brought in, but whether it went to the right place or not was questionable. And I think that's what everybody feels when you get all this junk mail. What is worthy of getting it? And I can't help but think history does repeat itself.
Mm-hmm. Lucinda, I brought in Bob bring in a couple of pictures here for us.
Don't be like the man who came to dinner. You didn't even get any dinner.
Particularly this one.
Uh-huh. Well, that one you see without the porch on it.
Yeah, it's a very lovely perspective of the house. And then it also has these other outbuildings in it. And on the far left there, that's the hired hands house. That looks like it was pretty new at the time this photograph was taken.
Oh, let's see. This was taken in about 1896, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that was in 1885. I believe the same year as the church.
Okay. And then it also shows those other barns in back, between the hired hands house and the brick house.
Yeah.
Well, are those barns still standing?
No, I think the only one is the one that's higher up. You can see. I think that's the main barn. I'm not sure, but it looks about the right distance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you could see it in that other one too. but it's just a little bit of the roof or something.
Right. But this other one, just to the right of the hired hands house, I don't think
No,
that structure
no.
is standing any
No,
longer.
no.
There
I
is-
wouldn't think any of the, let's see. That may not be the one. I think maybe the main barn is back in behind.
Mhm.
'Cause I kind of think these were all expendable.
Yeah, you're right. Well, a lot of times barns are, unfortunately. Something else I was curious about is the location of the log cabin. And I was reviewing my notes, and in one reference, it talks about it used to sit on the site of the old horse barn. And I was wondering if that was the location. Do you remember offhand where the log cabin used to stand?
Well, I wasn't here.
No?
I think Grandfather Corron said it was near the horse barn. I suppose, see, when that was built, it was the only house. He had spent the first 6 weeks over on McDonald Road near the spring, or went back and forth, I'm sure because he had the land. And our deeds, that's something you probably should take a picture of if you're taking.
We'll find those too, yeah.
It's on top of the, Bob?
So most of that we want to get, I need it more controlled.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll want to also come back and do a control, like tabletop shoot of a lot of them too, but the deeds,
It's all right.
See what I have? I think every so often I just am so thankful I've got somebody who runs and does and knows what they're looking for.
mm-hmm. So for 6 weeks, when he initially came, he was over by the spring.
Well, use the spring. I'm not sure that he ever lived there. I think as soon as possible. I think it took him probably 6 weeks to build it. Now this is not the original, but it's
Oh, this is a copy. Do you have the original?
in the bank.
Oh, okay. We might like to photograph that sometime. If you'd be willing to pull it out for a special session, so we could.
I
get
don't
a
know what
picture
kind of
it.
shape it's in. I'd have to
Yeah.
have it.
So we could.
There are 4 or 5 of them.
4 or 5 deeds. Oh, for the different parcels that were
Uh,
bought.
they were. This is something on the history that I haven't been able to find out. I thought I had all the books on history that I needed, but this is. See, it says on there. Whereas Robert Corron of Kane County, Illinois, has deposited in General Land Office. Oh, that isn't important. The provisions of the Act of Congress of the 24th of April, 1820, entitled "An Act Making Further Provision for the Sale of Public Lands." Now, I haven't been able to find any record of that, but I haven't really worked on it. But actually, I think it goes back to 1787, where they the settler was given he had he had to purchase or agree to purchase 640 acres is a section. Now, I only know one place where that happened here. But most of these deeds, you'll see this one is what? Oh, here it is, right at the top. The northeast quarter of Section 2 in Township 40, north of range, even east of the third principal meridian, in the district of Sand, subject to sale at Chicago, Illinois, containing 40 acres and 42 hundredths of an acre. Now, they were all like that. That is, it was in 40, generally 40 acre parcels. And whether that takes...
And whose signature is on this one?
Oh, Tyler.
And who's that?
Well, he was let's see, by the president, John Tyler. I can't read the secretary. Signed by the recorder, the 10th of December, 1844.
That's a wonderful thing to have, Lucinda. To have those original deeds, I think that's absolutely amazing. And that they're signed by the President of the United States at the time.
Yeah, well,
That's wonderful.
we have some that are signed by Polk. His administration came in that period. And it seemed like when grandfather got the land paid for at $1.25 an acre, he started thinking about building the house.
Mm-hmm.
$50
Now these are just,
for 40 acres.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. That's a big difference from today when it's $25,000 to $30,000 an acre now.
I know.
That's an incredible rate of inflation going on there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but their income, that was why they were able to make so much of what they did.
Now this one, tell me about this picture.
Well, this was taken, I think, as nearly as I can figure, around 1885. We still have the buggy. It's up the barn. It went through the snowstorm. Otherwise, I would say probably, I would think the lady of the house, and I'm sure that was grandmother Corron, is standing in the doorway. Might have been the two women who were home, who were in the on the balcony, and I think they might have been the ones to the right of the picture. I think were probably hired help, and he looks very imposing. Cal always said he looked like a Methodist preacher. Anyway, grandfather Corron, I think, is the main one in there. And I think the other one over there would have been Robert Myron. Now, I could be wrong on those things. Let's see.
Can you see
There's
if you
nothing
can-
in the background, is
Can you
there?
see if you could
Just
point
trees.
out? Can you point out where great-grandpa Corron is standing?
Oh, right there, I think. And where's the little kid? But these two looked young. And most of the help they had just recently come from a foreign country, and they hire them for the harvesting season or whatever.
Right.
And we have in the attic what they called the Swede room, and they had these beds kind of lined up, and I'm sure each one had a bed, and I don't know how many were there, but they had little tables. So we've got a lot of rickety little tables around, or have had. Because some of them have really gone the way of the wastebasket or junk.
Firewood.
Not much. We don't send anything to the junk.
I love this collection of photographs.
Well, this is, I think this is Aunt Addie. Never had to do this before, but I think her hair was curly. This is Mary, the two daughters by the first wife.
Mm-hmm.
And this is Addison, wait a minute. Yeah, with an A. His, he died when he was about 22, I think. And this is Flora, and she died when she was in her early 20s. And this is the one I call Grandpa Corron, Bob's father, and his grandmother.
His mother or his Robert's mother or grandmother?
Oh, this is my Robert's Corron mother, or grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
She had the 3 grandchildren here.
Right.
Cal was quite a bit younger than the others.
Oh, okay. Let's set this over here. So.
You can see how rickety some of our frames are.
Oh, they're wonderful frames. This is a beautiful frame, very appropriate for the period.
Well, we had, I think most of those are pictures of an original. Because we had them made for all the family.
Would it be all right with you if I brought in the piece of cranberry glass that had your grandmother's name in it? Can I bring that in for a minute?
If you want it.
Yes, please. Here, hold this up so Dave can kind of see the name in it. Tell us about that piece, Lucinda.
Well, this was always in my mother's china closet, and she got it when she was a girl and went to the Chicago Exposition, was it? Something like that.
What year was that?
Uh-huh.
The Columbian Exposition.
A Columbia Exposition. But it was the World's Fair.
And it has her name on it. It says.
Yeah, Lizzie Beith. 1890. I think it's 93. I think it's a period after it. I couldn't figure out how it had 5 figures in it.
Right. Part of what intrigues me about your personal history is the fact that you married into the Corron family. Your grandmother was a Beith, and somewhere in there, you're also related to the Richmonds.
Well, the Richmonds, my grandmother was a Richmond. And in fact, I think she was the oldest. No, Frank's father was the oldest. And then I think my grandmother was Lucinda Richmond. And she was just a very quiet, very much like my mother. You wouldn't believe that, would you, when you hear me talking all the time? But they were very gentle, sweet ladies. I'm not so sure about the rest of the family. The Muirheads had a lot of get up and go. And the Corrons didn't let them push them around either, I don't think. So I guess on all sides, my kids are kind of handicapped. Dave is most like my family, I think. In fact, I said to him once, I think you're like the Richmonds. Thanks, boys.
How would you characterize Grandpa Corron? You know, when you moved your family into this house, and that was Myron?
Myron.
Mm-hmm. What can you tell us about Myron?
Oh, he was a wonderful man. He was very quiet, and he, but just a gentle, sweet. Yeah, I know you shouldn't use sweet in connection with the male, but he was a sweet man, and he could be stubborn. I've got a son just like him. Not quite as sweet, but Dave is very much like his grandfather in many ways. But nobody pushes him around. But they try not to get in trouble. And Grandpa loved his family and didn't like to go very well. I remember Flora used to tell how she was so like her father because she would get up and say, I don't have anything I have to do today. I can stay home. Now I know what she means. But I always had to go and did go a lot.
Mm-hmm. He was sort of a homebody.
Well, I always stayed home with the kids, and I never really worked. That's why I went to volunteer at the state hospital, because you could go there and sit, put your feet up and visit, and feel you were doing something, not thinking of all the dishes you left unwashed and beds not made and so forth. And they were so appreciative. And I taught school for long enough to know that such appreciation was not commonly spoken of, but you go to the hospital one day and they thank you for coming.
What years were you visiting at the hospital, Lucinda?
I started in 1965, and I think I went for 32 or 33 years. I kind of tapered off. I was having trouble then getting around, and I was still driving. I drove up until 98, which was time I quit.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't regretted quitting, but I've been fortunate.
Do you remember your first car?
The what?
Do you remember your first car?
I don't think we had a Rio, I think, but I don't remember it. But I remember the Veely we had. Did you ever hear of a Veely? L-I-E. And it was 7-passenger. You had little seats that you pulled up in the back. Of course, that's all I ever got to ride on when I was little. But I remember we had that when my sister died. And that was back in the days when you didn't hire a limousine to go to the cemetery. You drove your own car or whatever you had. Of course, you were lucky to have a car at that point. But there were 7 of us in the family, so. Well, 6 without Elizabeth.
Something else I wanted to ask you about was the rocking chair you have in the other room back here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, do we want to bring that in right now?
You can bring it in if you want. It may fall apart, but no, it won't fall. It's well made.
Could you tell us about that?
Well, now this is all I know. It's a little bit like some of the sketchy things that Grandma Corron would tell me, but she said this was the only piece of furniture that he had had in the log cabin. And when you see it, you realize that it was homemade.
Could you describe it for us?
Well, it would be easier if you wanted to show it.
Oh, we'll do that too, but I'd love to hear you talking about what it looks like.
Well, it's a rocking chair. Not the one in the East Room, but just a plain rocking chair. And it has the back cushioned with twine and things that he probably was using outside and brought them in when he was making the chair. It's black. I've never done anything to it because the cushion is pretty faded, but I didn't want to recover it because I thought it kind of looked old and matched. And so that's about all.
So the cushion is original also? I mean, the twine is sort of the caning in the seat and then also the back to the chair. But then the cushion,
Well, I just would assume that he put it together somehow. I'm not a... I have a son-in-law who did the cabinet there, and I was impressed with that. So, but I couldn't really comment on it. I remembered it sat in the dining room. Grandpa had a radio in there, and when he always would come out of his room was his sanctuary, and it was really a good thing because Bob was 9, Sally was 7, and Dave was 4. I think he just had a birthday a few days after Grandma passed away. And the only one who took liberties going into Grandpa's room was Dave, and he would take Sears Roebuck Catalan. I told you that, didn't I? I bet I've repeated myself 100 times. Anyway.
That's okay. What would he do with the Sears catalog?
Take it into Grandpa and have Grandpa help him make out an order. Of course, it never seemed to get it. This was his Christmas. And then one year he did this, talking about smart things or cute things, anyway. He did. We always had, the Mothers Club had a barbecue supper at school, and I was taking care of the buns or something like that at the barbecue supper, and I made holders out of leftovers from feed sacks, which I had used to make the things with, because at that time we got those pretty feed sacks. Do you remember that?
I've seen them, yes.
Well, they were all different patterns. So I was making some of these. Dave got the idea that he could make some, and I found one he had given to our hired man, and one he'd given to Grandpa for Christmas that year. Yeah, I thought it was cute.
Do you still have those?
I don't know where it is now. It's probably somewhere because we never threw anything away. But I was impressed with his ingenuity. He doesn't have that much now.
The children's imagination, right? Yeah. I was also very curious about the cheese box. Could we pull out the cheese box?
Yeah, you can bring the cheese box.
Let me go get that one.
It's good that you know where all these things are. And she's very patient about getting everything. I would say that frame probably wasn't very much, because see how rough it is?
Here, you hold it and you tell us about the cheese box.
Now, this is a cheese box. Dave had to do a show and tell bit. And so we went to the attic. And mostly we show this when kids come around, because it makes them realize that things are not always what you've seen. Now, instead of soccer balls these days, this was, I'm sure, one of the joys of, I don't know if I can hold that very well, but.
You just hold it in front of you. There you go.
Oh, I'm doing this. My left hand works better than the other. The house is full of these. They're a square nail, and oh, you want that down there?
Oh, that's fine. Thank you.
And I imagine there were a lot of these.
Well, what was that, Lucinda?
Cowbell. In this country, it's a cowbell. If it were in Switzerland, though, it would have a certain melody.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you. That's what they told us when we were there. That each farmer had a bell that played a certain melody, and that way he wasn't taking anybody else's sheep or whatever. These are the marbles that were probably leftovers from the. And this is what I always think of every housewife had to add to her ironing, which we don't do much of these days. The napkin rings, and you use your napkin, I suppose, for a week, maybe longer. And this, every kid loves this. This is what you put on the stove when your mother was ironing, and she had the big iron, you had the little one. I don't know if this means anything to all of you. And this is the button hook. I often think today kids don't have, they have television and they have all the modern things, but they don't have button hooks. And when we were kids and company would come, we'd hide the button hook. Kind of a big thing to hide, but we did, and it was fun. This was the kind of fork, I think, that they used at the Wild West things and stuff, Roy Rogers pictures and stuff. But Grandma just swore by this kind of a fork when she was fixing meat and stuff. It was very special. Oh, and the button hook, I should have showed you that at the same time. It's a good thing we didn't have a 7-footer. To have his shoe in this box, it wouldn't have fitted very well. But anyway, this is, I don't know if you can see this, how the button hook worked. For a one-handed person, I'm not very handy. I didn't realize it was so hard.
Here.
I never had to do it.
Lucinda, let's set the box down for a minute, and then you could kind of...
Yeah, that would be better. I would be coming from the right side. Must have been always easier to go to bed than it was to get up in the morning. Because you could just pull them off. Even with one hand, I can do that. This is what do you call them? Craft sort of thing. But my sister was blind, and she went to the school for the blind at Jacksonville. And I think of their little fingers having to sort through feeling the size, not being able to see it, of those beads. But it was remarkable what they did. That was back in 1915. Mm-hmm. I should have had her slate and stylus, but Sally has it out there. She shows it to her kids every year. And it's like a ruler. It has the alphabet in it, and you. Well, she had to go to school to learn the alphabet. I think A was like a one dot, but there were 6 little places. Then you had to punch it. When I was in college, there were 2 girls who were blind. They were from DeKalb County, and they had some trouble with a girl who was reading for them. She'd come in and read for classes. And for some reason, somebody, or this girl, they blamed it onto her. I don't know if she did, but they had had some trouble with her before. But they lost their stylus. And a stylus is, what can I compare it to? It's kind of blunt, but it would go in each one of those holes. And he had a little knob on the top. And she, and I said, well, we have a stylus. They had to order it somewhere, and they didn't know how long it would be. And I said, well, I don't know if you can use it. Well, they said they thought they could because I think she had to be, yes, they were younger than Elizabeth would have been when she had it. But they said there's something about it, like it's like a pencil or a pen. You get used to it, and you can't pass it on very well. But she used it for quite a while. So things do come back sometimes. Of course, now that's all. When did they get rid of the manual type of?
I'm not that familiar with how blind people would train to read and so.
I never thought of that, but I was thinking of it now. See, it was a slate and stylus, is what they called it, and you put your paper in, and it was about the width of what do you call it, legal size paper, and you had little hooks on each side. They could get it, and then they had to feel their way to find out what they were writing. And she would write home. After all, she was only in third grade, I think, when she was there last. She went to school different times, but she was not very well. She'd get sick and have to come home. And so I would guess maybe third grade. She'd been to the country school before, so she knew colors and she knew grass and things of that sort, but couldn't see.
What was her name, Lucinda?
Elizabeth. And she died when she was 14. I was younger, so some of the things I didn't remember, and I certainly didn't appreciate what my folks went through. Nobody ever does. Well, I think everybody is comparatively thoughtful about people, but we do tricks like sneaking into a room. Nobody'd see you, but Elizabeth would always hear you.
I think that's funny. I think we're going to stop here for today. 'Cause
You don't have to come back again? I have run out of anything.
are you running out of things to talk about? I have more questions to ask you. What I want to ask you about now is how did you meet your husband? How did you meet Bob?
When I met him, I went to summer school in Wheaton, and Flora was going there, his sister, and I met him then. And we had a pretty long courtship, but a wonderful one, and a wonderful marriage. He likes sports. I like sports. We went to a lot of games. Hard to imagine it now, but we went to a lot of games and at the stadium, hockey and that sort of thing.
Oh, in Chicago? You would travel all the way into the city to watch hockey games and football games and things?
Oh, one a year.
Mm-hmm.
When he could get off milking or something. But Bob was a very special person.
Why do you say that? What do you remember as being very special about him?
Well, you're asking me, everything is special. We used to go on day trips, like I say, between milkings. And he was always looking for license plates. He knew a lot of history. He was very bright. And but he didn't know much history about family, except he knew that his grandfather arrived here on October 16th. And they celebrated that day for years, in 1835. And then I understand now that they put an 1837 up on the sign up here. I don't know who's responsible for it, but one of the fellows from the township said, well, I don't know why they couldn't have looked on the horse barn because we've got 1835 out there. But that was a very special day for the family to celebrate. And
How would they celebrate that?
oh, dinner usually. I guess, of course, I wasn't here for much of the time, but in late years it was all that they did.
What other things about Bob made him special that you remember?
Well, like I say, he loved sports. I think he played with Wasco teams, and after that, he was manager for the Berglund team for years. Became Berglund Hummel, I guess. It was a softball team, locally. But he was very active in. And he was always being asked to MC something.
Oh, what kinds of things would he MC?
Pure Milk Association. I remember going to a Pure Milk banquet once, and the special speaker asked for a glass of milk. This was in the Wasco church. And they didn't have any milk. I think after that they instituted this, somebody did at least, the little cartons of milk that they gave to each guest. But at that time, the speaker made quite a big thing of it, how he thought at least he could get a glass of milk in a dairy community. Of course, in late years, there hasn't been a dairy. When our dairy moved out, the only other one is down the road on Corron Road, within range. So it's a lost art.
The Lenkitis farm, maybe?
No, it's
Where
it's South Silver Glen.
yeah,
That's right.
Mrs. Bailing's farm.
Oh yeah, this is Bailey.
Yeah,
She has the sheep.
yeah, she has the sheep, but she sold her part of her farm to Mr. Lenkitis, and he has dairy cattle down there. So I think that's the one you're talking about, right, Lucinda?
And then Curtis, I can't remember his name,
Yeah.
but there's, as far as I know, they're still dairying. And I think one of the daughters married somebody from out in the DeKalb area, and I believe they still have a dairy, but I'm not sure. I don't know why I'm volunteering that information when I don't know.
What was your husband like when he was a young man? When you were courting, what was he like?
Oh, he had a definite sense of humor. He loved to tell stories, and he told them well. And I take the same story and try to tell it, and I always mess it up.
Now, did he go to college also?
No, I don't know if he ever got started. He was going to go to Illinois Wesleyan, but his father was sick and poor health, so he was needed
he
home.
took over the farm operation then? So he was farming here at the Corron farm, right? And it was mostly...
Yes, well, we lived up where Bob Jr. has been living. Now nobody, I don't know if anybody's moved in there yet or not, but and I don't know. Imagine eventually they will probably tear the house down. So I'm making a lot of changes. So I can't tell too much. But Bob always lived in the home here.
Do you know how old that house is? The one-
Pardon?
Do you know how old the house down on Silver Glen?
Well, Frank Richmond said when they remodeled the house when we were married in the 40s, he said that the bricks from this house that had been made here in this house, for this house, and were left, were used in the walls down in that house. So I would just guess around the 1860s, but I'm not sure. But it was quite remodeled. It was in very good shape, and it always has been.
What year did you and Bob get married?
In 46.
46. And how many children did you have, and what are their names?
Robert and Sarah and David. This was David you just met.
And do they have children?
Only Bob.
And how many children does Bob have?
Ashley. One. My grandchild. That's why I had to do volunteer work at the state hospital, because I had all these kids that called me Grandma.
Now, what kind of work would you do at the state hospital, and where was that?
Oh, nothing much. I'd visit, and they're just delightful people, but sick. And they're so grateful for anyone coming in to see them. I did it for 30-some years. I don't think Bob was ever quite resigned to it, but he did get to go with me sometimes when we'd have parties for them. But he, I think, was always afraid something had happened. And I never had that thought at all.
Now, was that at the Elgin State Hospital? Over on...
Yeah, I started out, it was the Elgin State Hospital. Then it became the Elgin Mental Health Center. But it started, I think, it's the Northern Illinois Asylum for the Insane. I think that was the original name. There were 5, I remember this from history book, 5 asylums around the country. I don't know. I think there was one in, not Bloomington. What's the next door to Bloomington? I can't think of the name.
Normal? Bloomington?
No. I think there was one there. And there was one down at Anna. And I'd never heard of Anna till I met people who had worked in Anna and came up here to the hospital. No, it was a wonderful experience. I only visited. As I used to say, it's the only place I know where you can sit and visit, put your feet up, and rest. And Bob's theory was I had enough to do at home, and I said, yeah, but it'll still be here. And it always was.
Now, your husband was involved in a lot of civic matters, too, in the township. Didn't he serve as township supervisor?
Yeah, he served, I think it was 27 years. He loved it. That was his way of getting away. And he was always active in community affairs and church. And
Now, when the two of you were married, what church did you belong to?
I belonged to the Plato Church,
Mm-hmm.
Methodist Church. Then, but Bob's, I think I told you about the grandparents built the church down in the woods. And so at heart he always said he was a Methodist, but that's a Baptist church. And, well, just don't know what it is now because they've gone through a lot of changes.
Well, hadn't the church that you had right over here on the Corron farm, wasn't that a Methodist church?
That was Methodist.
Uh-huh.
And they had a circuit. The parsonage was in Plato. Mm-hmm. And they had an East Burlington church. They call it East Burlington. It's on the end of it, McDonald Road, but west of 47. It isn't there anymore. Mm-hmm. And this church was taken down, I think, in 1929 or something like that. Mm-hmm. You see what happened? There were so many of these little churches around, but then when cars came in, people could go to their favorite denomination, wherever it was.
So you mentioned something about Baptists, though. Was your husband always a Methodist then, or did he worship with Baptist congregations also?
Oh yes, he'd go. We went to church at the Baptist church for quite a while.
And where was that?
In Wasco.
Oh, in Wasco, okay.
And I had gone there until I just hadn't been able to get around and go without some help. And the boys were busy. Sally was very active. But then she hasn't been home since she started teaching in 71, and she's still teaching. Mm-hmm. She hopes she can retire in another year.
Mm-hmm. What would you say makes you most proud about your children?
Apparently,
when you think about your children and how you raise them, Lucinda, what makes you most proud about your children?
Oh, I don't really know anything to be very proud of. I'm just very thankful for the life I've had and the cooperation I've had from so many people and the things I've learned from so many people. But I just am very thankful for all the help that has been given me. And I think that, in a sense, was... Because I had always thought I loved teaching, and I thought I would go back to teaching. Well, and when I moved down here, we had a hired man. There were 7 in the family, and a big house, none of which I did very well with, but we managed. And Bob was always... He wasn't very much of a housekeeper, but he was very supportive of anything I did. His family was.
What do you think was the most challenging thing as a parent growing up?
Oh, I don't know, try to instill in them some of the faith that I have, the Christian background that is so important, I think. After all, rearing children is not a talent that we're all blessed with, and you wonder how many mistakes you've made along the way. But I am very grateful for my kids. Right now they're helping me and by just taking care of things. And Sally comes home. I think you saw her came home last week loaded with groceries. She stops and gets the groceries and comes as often as she can.
What was it like for you to raise the kids here on a farm?
Well, I don't know, really. We supported them in all their activities. Bob was in the league. Well, Dave was too, but he gave it up after a year or two. Dave is very social, has lots of friends, but it did not include joining things. I guess he didn't like the obligations that can put on people. In fact, I've never been great on joining things. I think we're a society that needs people, but sometimes I think we've put just being a member of something is, unless you're going to be a good member, right? It's kind of a waste.
How do you think raising your children on a farm was different from parents who were raising their children in town or in Chicago?
Well, I think I have a lot of sympathy for parents who live in big cities and their only playground is the street, whereas in here there are always chores. There was always something they had to do. They may not have liked it, but they never rebelled much. I always remember Dave saying that I suppose somebody had asked him what he wanted to do when he grew up, and he said, well, I want to be a farmer. But he said, I don't want as big a farm as my dad. I want to have time to go hunting. And so that's kind of, it's true. You're never done. It's just like being a homemaker. You're never done. You have left so many things undone. And as I look back for the last century, there are so many things I should have done and didn't do. And I thought of it not, I thought of it quite a few years ago. My favorite teacher in 8th grade was a lady from Hampshire, and she was the best, she gave me the best background in English and writing that I could have asked for. And she gave it to her class. And she just passed away about 5 years ago. And I always regretted that I never wrote to her and never went out of my way. And she wasn't that far away. I could have gotten in touch with her. But I never got around to do it. And I guess that's what my life has been. Not getting around to do the things that I should have done. Thinking of others. That was one thing about going to the state hospital. I went every week. So I went every week at a certain time. And you know, if you do things at a certain time, you'll do them. But if you don't do them, and now that I don't drive, I used to go and visit a lot of people. I miss all that. But I find it all comes back to you. And the kindness they show you when you get to be so helpless.
What kinds of things would the kids help out with on the farm?
Oh, I don't really. There's so many details that, like with the dairy, feeding, cleaning, putting hay down, baling, all of these chores that we just take for granted just take time and energy. And I've noticed especially since they gave up the dairy that especially Bob looks so much more rested and like he doesn't, you know, you knew the cows are waiting for you at 5 o'clock in the morning, and at 5 o'clock thereabouts, and maybe supper was waiting for you sometime, anytime. Dave and I have had an awful time getting back on a schedule as far as eating is concerned.
What was your father-in-law like? Bob's dad.
Just a very gentle, kind man. He was not what a friend of mine used to say, a take charge person. He loved his home, he loved his family, and he loved the farm. And I know it would have broken his heart and his son's heart if they'd seen the farm being sold. But that's one of the crosses that you have to face.
Do you think they would have thought it better that you sold it to the township like you did, rather than for development?
Oh, I'm sure he would have preferred that. But I think he would have preferred to have had boys who were able to carry on. Even though this is an area in which farming is just prohibitive. When you put in a crop and pay all that you have to pay for putting in that crop, and think of that, for a young man. Now, we were more fortunate, our boys were, in having a lot of equipment. A lot of it was pretty old, but it filled a need that they had, and they didn't have to start out from scratch like so many people did. But at the same time, when it's a losing proposition, and you're working 16 hours a day, there's just no future in it.
How do you think development in this area has impacted the area?
Well, I look down over the fields and I think, how much of the new building that is going on is going to be lasting? I look at these malls that have sprung up all over. And the first ones that came are now practically extinct. We just saw the leveling of that West Side Mall in St. Charles. And that must hurt a lot to see all that good land just stand there deteriorating for the farmer who worked it for so many years. It must be very distressing. Would have been very. I'm sure he isn't around now to see it since that came, but I don't know why that mall didn't really do better. as I understand it, I haven't been there since they first opened the Charleston Mall. I understand that isn't doing too well.
It's having its ups and downs. They're struggling.
Of course, our economy's always been that way. But farm economy has been really down for a long time. And as I say, not much future in it.
Well, with all the stores, being built, and with all the people that come into this area and buy new homes and subdivisions, how has that changed the community, Lucinda?
It is deteriorating as far as the community is concerned. A community doesn't mean much anymore. If you have to go 15 miles to a private school with your kids and you live in a subdivision, you aren't much interested in the fellow who lives next to you. I found that out. See, I worked the cancer drive for years on a volunteer basis, and I tried to get workers from subdivisions, and it was murder. Nobody wanted to do it. And I'd say, well, it's a good way to get acquainted with your neighbors. Go in and have a cup of coffee with them, or what have you. Most of them said they didn't know their neighbors. And they didn't add it, but they might very well have added, I really don't want to. Mm-hmm. Now, it was, I can't say a thing because I haven't been a very good neighbor either. But we were here if anybody wanted anything. They came, but that was the old way. And now everybody is so independent. And I just think the community spirit has suffered a great loss. And if I sound like a small town person, I am. I have always maintained there is no great quality in bigness. You must be running out of things to ask.
I got a whole nother page here. Let's see what else we got here. When you were raising your kids, did you have special family parties or family gatherings?
Oh yeah, for years we had a Muirhead reunion that averaged around 50 once a year. Well, I guess at one time it got to 100. But we went for a long time to the, are you familiar with the YW camp? Tuendui
Oh, up north
on 25.
Yeah, I've not been on the grounds, but I've heard about that. When you drive by, you see the signs or something. Yeah.
I don't know what it's like now because I haven't been there in years, but we did go there for many years.
Mm-hmm.
I think we started in about 1930 and had a reunion every year. But then as the family grew up and went different ways and don't even know their cousins a few generations removed, and it isn't so much distance, I think it's just new interests. It's the same thing that's happened to the communities in general. And so we stopped having them.
Mm-hmm. When did you stop having them? In the 60s or something?
No, more like the late 80s or early 90s.
Oh, okay.
I can't remember when we had the last one. And I was secretary for years. I gave all that information to my nephew,
Oh, who was that?
Jack Muirhead. He lives in
Where does he live?
Bloomington.
Bloomington? Oh, downstate?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Oh, there are Muirheads everywhere now. His brother just married, his brother's daughter just married a Boston Celtic ball player. Quite a big affair, according to
Yeah,
Bill was just here this morning.
yeah,
He's the younger brother.
okay.
He lives up at the farm. But my brother had four boys and one girl.
Now, you had told us a bit about your grandmother, Beith, your grandma Beith, but then you had also mentioned to me the Kenyon family that apparently were descendants of Joseph Corron.
Who is that?
Kenyons.
You better spell it for me.
Kenyon.
Oh.
The Kenyon family.
Oh, they're related to the Corrons.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And they lived in this area too, right?
Yeah, when Robert Corron came here, of course, there weren't many white people around here now, but the spring before, he came in October, Joseph Corron settled in South Elgin, Clintonville by name, if you're familiar with it, but and took out a big tract of land. And Joseph had 5 boys. Let's see. I think that's right. He had 3 that were born. One was an infant, one was 2, and one was 4, which sounds like something went through. Anyway, they died in 1840, and another son died in the Civil War, and another son died. I don't know if he had tuberculosis. I think he was sick for a while, but he died in his youth.
Mm-hmm.
So here's this man who had every hope of having a family pass on as Corrons, had 1 daughter. And that's where all the Kenyons from this area come from.
And then you've also talked about the Norton family. Now, did Flora marry a Norton,
Mm-hmm.
Bob's sister? So you're related to. There's a connection between the Corron family and your family of several notable farm families in the community, including.
Well, isn't that what genealogy is all about? I mean, you stop to think, you can go through this cousin that I use the term loosely, but she was the offspring of my Bob's great-grandmother's first husband. And I've just gotten acquainted with her in the last year or two, and she's gotten more stuff about Corrons. They all came from I think, Pennsylvania, Virginia area. And she's been gathering all this. And it just amazes me. But that's genealogy. We all go back to Adam and Eve. Maybe not willingly.
Do you remember your sister-in-law? Do you remember Flora?
Oh, yes.
Could you tell me a little about her?
Oh, she was a lovely person. Have you met Barbara? She married a Thames. They live up near Hampshire, but Barbara's just like her mother. Well, not really. She's more outgoing than Flora was. Flora was more like her dad, rather quiet and everything. But Barbara's been teaching for years, and that kind of makes people a little bit obnoxious at times. They all have a tendency to want to run the show. Here I am doing all the talking.
And who did Flora marry? What was his full name? Do you remember?
Dexter Norton.
Mm-hmm. And were they married here in the house?
Yes. Flora was married here. Jane and Bob were married here. And I'm not sure, I think Cal thought it, but I think Grandfather Corron's Adelia was married here. The house was built, so it was a show place at that time. They were probably married here. But they moved to Iowa. And so far I've had no luck at all getting in touch with that descendants of that family.
With Adelia's branch of the family?
Well, see. What was it you wanted to know?
Well, I was intrigued by the fact that several couples were married here in the house. What room were they married in?
Well, Flora was married in there, and Bob and Jane were married in there. Now, Sally was married in there too.
And how do you describe that room, Lucinda?
Room? It's just the nicest room in the house, but it's not easy to heat, but it's an awfully good place to store all your Christmas presents. We got all the Christmas junk down in there now. And it's just too cold.
Yeah.
See, there's no basement under it. And if you don't, and you've got 5 windows. Just to say nothing of the 3 doors.
Yeah. But visually, how would you describe the room in terms of what makes it such an elegant room to hold a wedding in? How would you describe that to people?
Well, I think because it's so light, you can take a look at it and see, except you maybe get a whiff of cold air. But you can look at it and see why you would think it was. And it was the biggest, probably the biggest room, because most of our rooms are about, till you got all your equipment in, I thought this was a pretty good sized room. And Bob, for years, wanted to take out, he was always talking about it, take out the wall in between here and make the dining room and living room one. Well, I'm glad he didn't. It's a much warmer house than if we'd had all that to heat. Also, the dining room has always been kind of special. We had a lot of family dinners, and not anymore. Time marches on.
Now, the room over here, has this primarily been a guest bedroom?
It was I have taken over because stairs are a little out of my realm now.
Mm-hmm.
But and the fact that there's no bathroom in the room did not make it ideal. And Bob was always bringing somebody in and showing them how they could move the stairway and make that a bathroom off the room. But nobody ever agreed with him. So it never was done.
Okay.
But I don't think it would have worked very well. The ceilings are so high, and everything is difficult to do. And I guess probably from the historic standpoint, if they want to deal with the historic, it's better that they haven't done too much. See, actually nothing has been changed, except, I guess you'd say, the floors and the porch out here.
Mm-hmm. They put another layer of flooring over the, like,
Yes.
the thinner oak flooring, I would
I think it's an oak
I would
flooring.
guess, yeah. In one of the articles I was reading, it talks about a particular room that was Bob Corron's sanctuary.
It's what?
I think it was an office or something that was,
Oh, that's what we've got the computer in now.
is that back that way?
Yeah, it's got a big bookcase in it. Grandma Corron always used it as a kind of a, I guess, an offspring of a summer kitchen. She'd put things in there. And I can't remember what they had in the bookcases. We've got books. We've got books of everything. I think Bob had almost a complete set of the Zane Greys. You know Zane Grey?
Yes.
Oh, you grew up on Zane Grey. I always figured that was a really good book to start a kid who didn't want to do a book review. Zane Grey was waiting for him.
So that was
his room. Then Cal and Dorothy moved into up there when we moved out. See, we moved here when Grandma Corron died. She died very suddenly and very young. And Dorothy and Cal lived here with Grandpa for a month or so. And then we moved in. But Dorothy used to say, that's Cal's wife, that Bob, every time he came in the house, would measure that room to see if his desk would go in there. Because his folks had given him this big desk before he was married. And he had it down there in kind of a big room. And in this room, it's in, and that's it. There's about so much room on each side. Of course, the whole office was taken off the garage, I think. I think that would be another change. That when and the bathroom. After all, they were putting in bathrooms in 1850. And for a while, I was putting all my junk mail that I got, people asking for gifts, on Bob's desk. And I've got my desk that I had brought from home in here. And both desks were loaded. And they still are.
Mm-hmm. Now, what was your mother-in-law like?
The what?
What was your mother-in-law like? Was that Amanda, was it? Grandpa Corron's wife? Augusta.
Yeah, Augusta.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I always used to tell Sally she shouldn't complain. Her name is Sarah Louise. And I said, Well, we were debating whether we should call you, what was it? No, I can't even remember it. Hannah Augusta. And Sally, very seriously in high school, came to me and said something. Did you really mean that you were going to call me Hannah Augusta? I said, no, I thought I was being kind of funny. she, she had worried about it, I guess. But I thought, see, my mother's name was Hannah Elizabeth. And the Augusta, I never cared very much about, but her name was Augusta Louise. And so I just thought that would make an interesting name. There was never any question about the Roberts in our family. In fact, I told Bob there was only one requirement when his first was born. It shouldn't, if it was a girl, it shouldn't be something like Roberta or Robert or something. So otherwise names don't mean very much.
There has been a standing tradition in the Corron family about naming the eldest boy, Robert.
Amen?
Could you talk a little bit about that tradition in the Corron family, about naming their first born Robert, the boys? Just how
Well, I guess it's like almost any family, if it's a name they like. Now, Bob's grandfather was Robert Corron. His father was Robert Myron Corron, and he was Robert Charles Corron. And I don't know exactly who Robert Charles was, his grandfather on his mother's side. And we used the same name, Robert Charles, so it would be Robert Charles II. But I don't think there was any special tradition about it. We just did what we agreed on. If Bob and I could agree on something, although I will say, pretty much, Grandma Corron was the moving force behind, well, now we ought to do this, or we ought to do that. And I always remember her coming down when we were living on the other place, after they'd thrashed or something. She'd go out and she'd take the oats and in her hand and look at it, and isn't it beautiful? And she just loved all growing things. And I remember also she used to say to me, when you go to the chicken house, Cindy, do you knock on the door or say something? And I said, no. And she said, well, you really should. That they like to be respected or something. Anyway, I guess I didn't rate very high on that one but she had such a love for things. And you know what these little bandy chickens are? Well, we had a bunch of those when I moved down here. They didn't last very long, but Dexter Norton, and I think he had the same love for creatures that his grandmother did. But I don't think I had it. Not that much, anyway.
At least not to knocking on the chicken house door.
No. And usually I was pretty sleepy when I took care of them. Didn't spend much time.
Are there other favorite family stories that you like to tell people about Grandpa and Grandma Corron?
Well, Grandma was a most interesting person. She loved to sing, and I think she's the one that Sally did a lot of singing at weddings and stuff like that. But I think she got it from Grandma. Sally was 7, I think, when Grandma died. So she probably did, but she just remembers that Grandma was always singing.
What kinds of things would she sing, Lucinda? Do you remember?
Mostly church songs.
Church songs?
Of course, that was in the days before radio and television and all that stuff.
Did she play an instrument?
No.
Uh-huh.
No, I don't know. Her father was killed in a train accident. I think the team ran away, and he was thrown out of the wagon down in Wasco. A train. They used to have trains through there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that line that goes out to DeKalb. It's now the trail, I think.
Yeah, where did it go? I'm trying. Lily Lake. Lily Lake. Virgil.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think where all it went. But it's now a prairie path. It goes through Sycamore. See, Geneva still goes, doesn't it? Still has trains.
What do you think has been some of the biggest challenges that you've faced being farmers as you raised your family?
Well, the markets, I suppose, from an economic standpoint, are the big thing now when you stop to think that we bought the farm, they bought the farm back in 1845 for $1.25 an acre. And you think now of the thousands of dollars that they get for an acre. It's just impossible to measure it. I think those are things that the farmers have faced through the years. I think one of the things about history that bothers me is that I don't think the kids today have a very good background in history. I don't know, they tell how they don't seem to know this or that. And I think of course, the one thing I think of is World War II. I was teaching during that time, and many of my students went into the service. And it was a challenging time for all of us. I think do you know what a V-mail is?
A V-mail?
Uh-huh.
No, I'm not.
I just noticed when I brought this book out, I had one in here, I think. If I can find it. I have all the letters. Here's the V-mail. And we had it. I have quite a bunch of them. Because every time I went any place, went into study hall or anything, if I had a minute, I would write a letter. And it came like in a big sheet, like this. You're having trouble reading it, huh?
Can you read it?
I doubt it. Let's see. Dear Miss Muirhead, I want to thank you for sending me the Peptimus. That was our school paper. I would like to write a little and tell about where I am, but I can only tell that I'm somewhere in the Southwest Pacific. The country is very beautiful, and we live in primitive style. Although I saw pictures of this place in books and on maps, I never thought I'd be able to see it with my own eyes. The trip over here was very exciting, but it was too long to really enjoy it. When you look at nothing but water for a few weeks, you get plenty tired of it. I know I did. Clem was transferred to the Marines and in North Carolina, and is in North Carolina. Charles is in Chicago in the Navy. That was Darrell Tilton.
Did you know him?
Oh, yes, I had him at school.
So you would write your students.
Is that?
You would write letters to your students.
I write letters to the students and have them write to me. And I tried to give most of them back to them. But I still have quite a few. And so many of our World War people, you see, they're all in their 70s or early 80s, have left us. And I haven't gotten them all back to them. But they sent them, see, they didn't take as much room. And airplanes weren't not as, they're encouraging people to write. There was no other way to correspond. And so I suppose, I think, when I think back of things that I did when I was a teacher and it was worthwhile, I think one of the best things I did was to keeping in touch with my former students. Because the letters, I have a whole bunch of the Peptimus in which we would print. And in the summer, that's one of the joys of farming, you can do this. We'd take one day each month and we'd go up to the high school and I, of course, would edit the letters, you know, you go through a letter and you can't tell but I think one of the things that the kids liked about it, it wasn't the sort of letter they'd get from everybody else, because after all, who writes to an old English teacher with and talks about sending me candy or something? And I had special favorites, I'd send them candy too. But candy was expensive then to send.
Yeah.
And
could you hold that up for the camera so that we can see the letter?
I've yet written.
Just in the envelope, Lucinda. Just hold it up for the camera so that we can see the